of Betty Buzz. Because at Betty Buzz, we don't test on animals. We test on men. That's a good boy. Let him know how good it is.
Hi, friends. It's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. So last night there was the new docuseries. It's like a documentary about the Blake Lively Justin Baldoni case. It was a condensed version of the He Said She Said documentary that was made by ITN in England or UK, and ID Discovery picked it up and it debuted last night on ID and on Max. And I watched it and I had some thoughts. But first of all, Perez Hilton was in it, Shashti Flo was in it, and there was a journalist from BuzzFeed, there was an entertainment lawyer, there was a PR person, and then there was a digital writer for a magazine that was a guy. And this was interesting because there was no one that was representing anyone from either party. So you really didn't get any like insider information about what was going on. You heard from someone that like worked kind of as an extra on the film, but nothing really. And then they brought in someone that worked with Justin on Jane the Virgin, but she was only in it for a very few minutes and then never circled back to her. So you really don't get anything insightful outside of like what you would already see in the court records. So it's a lot of people kind of like me or other people that do what I do talking about what this is. And my takeaway from this was that they tried to keep it very neutral, right? So they were trying to show both sides of the story. Blake's side was given a lot more leniency. And I suppose in a way, the mainstream that's putting a show out on a documentary or on a network doesn't want to come off as victim blaming. I get it. Like there's this, you don't want to blame the victim. You don't want to come after a woman that's made a allegation and assume that they're lying. And so you want to toe the line and not attack the victim. Like one of the biggest issues in court is that actual victims of sexual abuse or sexual assault will be attacked. And oftentimes their credibility or their sexual history becomes a factor in telling the story. And in some states, you can't do that anymore with defense, and police can't interrogate people like that. But in this case, it's a little bit more complicated because it's not just about the sexual harassment, it's about workplace, a hostile work environment coupled with the smear campaign, which the documentary spent next to no time talking about. I found it very odd that they spent very little time talking about the smear campaign, even trying to prove it to be true or not be true. It was just this blip where it's like, well, Blake said it was this and maybe it was that, right? And I feel like the smear campaign is the primary driving force of this lawsuit, right? She can't sue unless the smear campaign happens because she has to prove the retaliation because she already resolved the claims of sexual harassment. And if she can't claim the smear campaign, she really can't go back now and say that the sexual harassment was a thing because they never retaliated after they accommodated her quote unquote rural production protections. And I feel like the document that they described the protections for returning to work was not addressed accurately. I felt like they really glossed over why it came to be. Like the way that it was portrayed was like, well, Blake said that this protections to return to work was all decided at a production meeting and everything was great. And if it was very pointed and instead of actually addressing the 17 points, right, they spoke to the 30 things that she posted in her CRD complaint. And I was like, okay, so a lot has changed, obviously, since this was made. And I don't know when it was filmed. It could have been It was obviously before there was a motion to dismiss by Blake and a motion to dismiss by Ryan. It was before the gag order, and it was before the protective order. It was before some of the information came out. It was before the lawsuits against the PR companies. So it doesn't have the most up to date information. They used a lawyer that's based in California, but the lawyer that they used is not someone that works in employment law. Instead, the lawyer whose name was Dinah Dahl, she's based in California. She's known for, according to her bio, being on the Midas Touch, CNN, News Nation, Access Hollywood, Spectrum News, HLN, Court TV, Newsmax. She does podcasts. Basically, she covers high profile cases. Okay. And she's done stuff on like George Floyd, Kyle Rittenhouse, the different Trump investigations. That's what her bio says. Okay. But her practice is corporate law. Okay. And it's specializing in securities, mergers and acquisitions, and private equity. She assists in a large range of large corporate debt offerings, initial public offerings, and the formation of the largest fund ever raised by a private equity group. So she's also a delegate to the California Democratic Party. All of this is in her bio on her website. So the biggest thing here is that she's not a employment lawyer. She works in securities and acquisitions, very different than employment law. Also not a sexual harassment lawyer. That doesn't mean that she doesn't necessarily have experience in it. It just means that it's not what her specialty is. And I think in a case like this, if you're going to have a lawyer come on to a show and be a commentator, I think it's important that they have experience in employment law, not mergers and acquisitions, right? Mergers and acquisitions is with corporate. It has nothing to do with sexual harassment. It has nothing to do with hostile work environments. So her take was, I can't say how she based this off of, but it was that Blake Lively has a stronger case than Justin Baldoni. And her summation was that all Blake's allegations of sexual harassment are not explained away by Justin. Instead, they are given a different perspective. And his perspective and his like discussion about the takeover of the film doesn't at all explain the sexual harassment. And she said pornography or discussions of pornography, seeing live birth videos, and talking about genitalia are all valid claims for sexual harassment in a workplace. So the 30-point thing that she put in her CRD complaint, which was not what was provided to Justin or to Wayfair. It's not part of the document that they signed. It's not part of the 17-point agreement. And Wayfair is adamant they never saw this document until after she filed this complaint, and that none of these claims were brought up to them. And in there it says no more discussions about your genitalia or describing your own genitalia. But there's absolutely no argument or narrative about what this description was. So in her complaint, there's no conversation that she talks about where this is discussed by Justin. Nothing. There's no conversation that she brings up in the case. It's just this no more discussions about your genitalia. It says no more descriptions of their own genitalia to Blake Lively, which, I mean, on the face sounds incredibly, it's so inappropriate. Of course, like if you have a boss that's doing that, that's disgusting. Why would you want to be in a workplace if your boss is literally talking to you about his genitalia, right? But there's nothing in the actual complaint where she talks about Baldoni or Heath speaking about their genitalia. In fact, she talks about her own genitalia in terms of like when she does the birth scene, right? She talks about the sex scenes that they had to work together and create for the film. She does address this in this page 16 of her CRD complaint. I don't know if this made it to the end of her amended complaint, but it says during a car ride with Miss Lively, her assistant and driver, Mr. Baldoni, claimed to Miss Lively that he had been sexually abused by a former girlfriend, which he has since shared publicly. At the end of the story, Mr. Baldoni shared that it caused him to re-examine his past. He then said, "Did I always ask for consent? No. Did I always listen when they said no? No." Mr. Baldoni claimed this was an example of how we all have things from which we can learn and grow. Miss Lively was unsettled by Mr. Baldoni's suggestion that he had engaged in sexual conduct without consent. When Miss Lively exited the car, her driver immediately remarked that he did not want Miss Lively to be alone with Mr. Baldoni going forward. On the very first day of production, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath described their past sexual relationships to Miss Lively, including one of them used to hook up with a woman. Mr. Baldoni said that he had decided the woman wasn't the one, and so then Mr. Heath had gotten together with her. Miss Lively found this description of passing along a woman to be disrespectful and disturbing. She also claims that Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath often spoke of their previous pornography addiction. Mr. Baldoni would reference pornography to Miss Lively, hoping to shut down the subject. She said to him privately that she had never seen it. Later, when Mr. Baldoni was once again referencing his experiences with pornography, he revealed in front of the cast and crew that Miss Lively had never seen porn. It was an incredible invasion of her privacy to discuss any aspect of her intimate life with the cast and crew, much less reveal something that she had only told Mr. Baldoni to try to get him to stop talking to her about the subject. He also engaged in other behaviors that were shocking and emotionally distressing. For example, he claimed he could speak to the dead. Okay. He claims that he looks at women like sex objects. It's odd that during this CRD complaint, even though it says like no more discussions of your genitalia, there's nothing in here that claims that there's discussion about his genitalia. Now, on the surface, I don't know. Like in his amended complaint, he counters and says that there wasn't a discussion about past pornography addiction, and that he doesn't address the allegation about this car ride in which they talk about passing, or where he talks about consent. You've all seen the video where she's referencing what the consent means, and we know that that's not what he's discussing. But Baldoni says the topic of pornography came up when they were talking about the sex scenes, and they were describing how they were going to create them for the film, and he was relaying notes to the intimacy coordinator, and then she brought up that she didn't want it to look like porn. And then there was him saying that that's great because she said she had never seen it, and then he said that he had a problem with it, and then he says that he was entrapped. But he says that Heath, who had nothing to do with the exchange and has never had a porn addiction or even mentioned porn in Lively's presence, was falsely and knowingly lumped into this accusation. It's also outrageous to suggest that she was shown pornography. That's where they talk about the birth video or the two scenes that she saw, and that she labeled that as porn, and that it's deplorable that she would label that as porn. But they don't address like the swapping of relationships, or if that even happened. They don't talk about some of the things that she addressed or brings up in her complaint. They actually don't even talk about. So some of it they explain, and other parts they just ignore, and then in their answers they denied. So the issue with some of these is that if these are conversations that happen just between Lively and Baldoni alone, it's going to be really hard to say, like, who do you believe, Baldoni or Lively, right? Unless there's like a recording or it's a um on film. I don't know how you're going to have to decide if you find her more credible or him more credible. But all this to say is that in the documentary, the way that the lawyer framed it was that if you look at her complaint, it seems more compelling, and his don't really explain away the sexual harassment claims that she made. And in truth, I guess you could say that because, he doesn't address in his that he didn't talk about his genitalia. He doesn't address point by point every single claim that she makes. Rather, he denies that any of these situation happens, and he says that the CRD complaint is completely fabricated, filled with outright lies, or she's misconstruing situations and seeing them in perspectives that weren't there. And I think for some of the things that are some of her complaints here are that there's documented evidence, right? There's video, there's footage, there's the scripts, there's text messages, there's emails, and we are not seeing all of it. Blake will have to, under oath in a deposition, make all of the statements that she said publicly, or in that the 30 points that she put into the CRD complaint that she never actually sent to Wayfair. if she makes that statement under oath and says that this is what happened and it turns out that that's a lie, that's perjury. So I think one of the reasons they wanted to depose her is to see what she will actually say under oath. Will she make these same claims when there's the threat of going to jail or contempt if you lie? And I think, when anyone is consuming content about this, it's always just, we don't have the trial, right? We're only going off of what we see in the court. We're only seeing going off of the filings. And then we can look back at what happened during that period. We can watch different interviews. We can see her own admissions. We can look at what Ryan Reynolds has said and what she has said. We know based on their own public statements about sex and how they constantly speak about sex graphically, both of them publicly. It seems odd that, like, she would immediately get on a set and then be prude, especially when her husband is in, actual interviews talking about his penis, and in regards to, like, his baby, like, his penis doesn't work that way, the way breasts do for breast milk, just an odd, disgusting thing to say. It's Ryan that actually speaks about his own genitalia a lot. And I don't know where a lot of these ideas came up for as far as like what she thinks happened. I don't know if they just threw everything at a wall and thought something might stick. But, the basically what the attorney was saying was that none of this, like, it's not illegal, she said, to take over a film. It's not illegal to have creative control of a film. Of course, the studio is going to go with the big name because the big name is going to make them more money. But and it's not a crime. But that's not what Justin's suit is alleging. His suit is not alleging that she took over a film. It was that she threatened to expose him with false allegations of sexual harassment if he didn't acquiesce to her demands. And if he said no, she would threaten to go forward, or she would threaten to not do promotion, or she would threaten to not let Taylor Swift's song be in it, or she would threaten to pull the cast from promotion. So if she's using threats to get her way, which is what his allegations are, that would classify under the prongs of claiming extortion. It would meet that criteria. What the judge has to decide is whether or not they're going to use California law or New York law for this case. And that I don't know. I can't tell you what they're going to use. But I think that if you just looked at Blake's allegations and you didn't fact check it or look at the evidence that was provided, because she spent very little time going through the timeline of relevant events, instead, she made it seem like, oh, this is just a lot of stuff for their perspective. Blake hasn't shown proof that sexual harassment happened. She hasn't. It's hard to show proof in a document for a complaint, but nothing in her complaint shows sexual harassment. It just tells her side of the story. She didn't provide text messages of sexually inexplicit conduct between her and Baldoni. The only evidence she provided in her complaint were doctored and cherry picked texts about a smear campaign. Because I think the only evidence she has of anything is a smear campaign. She actually has no evidence of sexual harassment. But that's my opinion. It's also my opinion that she fabricated this. And it's also my opinion that based on what I've seen so far, she's not credible. So the documentary is called In Dispute. You can decide if you want to watch it. I think that it's, if you don't have the time to consume daily content on this, I guess it's a great place to start, but it lacks in so many areas. And again, I think if you're going to put a documentary together, you should find an attorney that is specializing in either sexual harassment claims or employment law. That's where I would go. So tell me what your thoughts are about all of this. Do you think that Blake actually has the better case, or do you think Justin Baldoni does? Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed and click the bell to never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.